When a new ban list comes out in Yu-Gi-Oh, it is a big deal, not only for competitive players, but also casual players and even ex-players get really excited when a new ban list drops. But there are a lot of changes to keep track of, and I feel like the community generally focuses on two when they're looking at a ban list. They're talking about the meta cards that got banned or limited, or they're talking about the older banned cards that recently came off the list. But in the background, there are other changes. You have semi-limited cards, you have unlimited cards, and these things, unless they're making an immediate competitive impact, oftentimes get forgotten by the community. Sure, we've had cards like Super Polymerization or Solemn Judgment that were banned for a long time and then slowly came off the ban list, and those are unlimited cards that people certainly remember because they're still being played, but not all of the newly unlimited cards see that much success. These cards aren't bad. I mean, they were good enough to make it on the ban list in some format, even if it was 5, 10, 15 years ago, so I'm not going to say these are terrible cards, but they're cards that maybe don't see play in modern Yu-Gi-Oh! If you did see any discussions about these cards being unlimited, it was likely very close to when the ban list was initially revealed. That's when people are most willing to try out new things, experiment a little, but after a week or two, maybe you didn't see so many discussions about these cards. That's not to say these cards couldn't be competitively viable in the future. They very well might end up being good choices in a future strategy or future archetype, but for now at least, since these cards have been unlimited, other than the first couple weeks, we haven't seen a lot of discussions about them because they're simply not that good in modern Yu-Gi-Oh, at least right now. First up, we have the card that actually inspired today's video, and that is Dark Hole. So this is a card that multiple times on stream I've completely forgotten is currently unlimited, and has been unlimited since July of 2019, so almost a year ago, and this card is one of those that's hard to keep track of because it was limited, and then it was semi-limited, and then it was back to limited, and then it slowly became unlimited over the years. So what happened here? Because at one point, I mean for a long time, Dark Hole was a competitively viable staple choice, and even past that, it was a good going second card for a lot of decks, especially in decks like Dinosaurs, which currently are pretty popular. You know, they could technically use Dark Hole to pop their own Baby Ceresaurus and trigger its effect. That exact combo has actually been used in the past. There were a couple deck lists from a couple years ago here that actually played Dark Hole over Raigeki just because of that interaction of destroying their own monster cards. Simply put, Dark Hole is just not enough anymore for going second. It might seem really weird, right? I mean, if people are making big boards, like obviously Dark Hole would be really good to break that board. Well, even if it's baiting a negation, that's not actually good enough. You know, back in the day, I think of like formats like Dino Rabbit where you would just use the Dark Hole to force the Logia negation. Even that's not good enough anymore because your opponent's going to have so many negations, and more importantly, we now have a lot more modern cards that are specifically designed for going second and being really powerful. Cards like Lightning Storm and Evenly Matched obviously kind of make comparisons to Dark Hole, but also I think of cards like Raw Sphere Mode and especially Dark Ruler No More. Where Dark Hole might force a negation, Dark Ruler No More just stops all of them, and that's really good. You can then just break your opponent's board with your regular cards. Dark Hole isn't a card that will ever be completely useless. Obviously, destroying monsters will always be good in some capacity, but as Yu-Gi-Oh gets older and as we get more and more going second cards to break these crazy boards that people are putting out, Dark Hole just isn't going to make the cut. Magician of Faith was banned in 2008 and remained there until 2014, where it slowly went from limited to semi-limited to unlimited by the end of that year. And when it first became limited, and keep in mind here, 2014, you know, it's way slower than right now. That's 6 years ago. So a lot of players, myself included, when Magician of Faith went from banned to limited, really thought that the card actually might be competitively viable. On paper, it can kind of seem that way, right? You know, if spell cards are only getting better as the years go on, surely a card that can recycle those more powerful spell cards would be even better in a more modern era of Yu-Gi-Oh! That turned out to not be true, because even by 2014 standards, setting a Magician of Faith and passing your turn even with a very powerful spell card in your graveyard was simply not fast enough. And I really don't think it has that much to do with being a flip effect monster. I mean, certainly that does play a role. It makes it a lot slower, but we've seen decks like Subterrors and decks like Shaddolls actually take pretty good advantage of flip effects in some pretty unique ways, flipping them up on your opponent's turn, flipping them up on your own turn through a variety of card effects to trigger their powerful flip abilities. And it's not that Magician of Faith's flip effect is a bad ability. Adding back any spell card with no drawback is a really good effect. However, because this card, unlike Subterrors or unlike Shaddolls, doesn't have a lot of synergy with other cards played in modern Yu-Gi-Oh! It makes it really difficult to play. That's unfortunate because this card was so iconic and was played for a very, very long time, but until we get a Magician of Faith archetype or other sort of neutral cards that can benefit flip effects just in general, we're probably not going to see this card at competition anytime soon. When Dark-Armed Dragon first came out, it was well over $100 a copy and was part of one of the most expensive Yu-Gi-Oh! Decks in the game's history. It continued, even after being semi-limited, to be part of some of the best decks over and over again, completely warping formats around how powerful its ability was. Dark-Armed Dragon became unlimited in January of 2020, so not that many months ago. Prior to that, it was limited for a very, very long time, and then it had a brief period where it was semi-limited, but for right now, it's currently unlimited and is basically seeing no competitive use. Now, don't get me wrong, this card actually was pretty good not too long ago. Actually, 2018, near the end of that year, it did see play in different Burning Abyss decks. I even played one copy in my Burning Abyss deck at YCS Pasadena in November of that year, and it was really, really good. The main reason was that you had a lot of graveyard manipulation effects, mainly Fairy Tale Snow, so you could always get down to 3 darks, and then you could keep putting more darks in your grave as your combo went on, and Dark-Armed Dragon could just pop your opponent's entire field. But those days are long past us, and Dark-Armed Dragon suffers the same fate as the next card I'm going to talk about, and that's that while this card was very, very powerful in the past, and was in a lot of really popular strategies, a lot of meta-defining strategies, right now at least, if you want to play a competitively viable deck, you need to mostly have good going first cards in your main deck. Now, maybe you're playing a dedicated going second strategy. Well, in that case, you're going to play cards like Lightning Storm or Evenly Matched, maybe Dark Glow No More. Dark-Armed Dragon just can't compete with those other going second cards, very similar to Dark Hole, which we talked about just a few minutes ago. Dark-Armed Dragon is not a bad card and certainly can steal some games. It is pretty powerful when it actually goes off. In the best case scenario, Dark-Armed Dragon is an alright going second card for a dark deck. The problem is that going second, you want to have really, really powerful cards like Lightning Storm or Evenly Matched or Dark Glow No More or Nibiru or other hand traps. Dark-Armed Dragon just really can't compete with those other types of cards. Blackluster Soldier Envoy of the Beginning went from limited for a while to banned for a while to limited for a long, long time. It spent over a decade where the only way that you could play this card was either at 0 copies or 1 copy. It was that powerful. But in 2017, Konami decided to semi-limit the card, and a lot of people started freaking out, and Blackluster Soldier prices went way up. I mean, people were like, holy crap, how is this card that has been limited or banned for so long finally at semi-limited? And sure, a couple like Lightsworn decks, a couple different Chaos decks did play it when it was semi-limited, but generally speaking, you know, not the dominating force that it used to be. And then in February of 2018, Konami decided to unlimit the card entirely, which honestly, if you would have told me like 5 years ago or 10 years ago that BLS would be unlimited and very few people will be playing it, I probably would not have believed you. And yet there we were, you know, we were playing in a format with 3 Blackluster Soldier, Envoy of the Beginning, no erratas, none of that stuff, but it just wasn't that popular. I will give it some credit though, more so than the other cards on this list, because this one actually did top a YCS in multiple deck lists actually. You saw Jesse Cotton and Asala both playing 3 copies in their Thunder Dragon deck list. Now, as time went on, people cut the card from their Thunder Dragon list, but for a little bit when Thunder Dragons first came out, people were experimenting with 3 copies of Blackluster Soldier, and it was pretty good in the mirror match as well for banishing cards like Colossus or Titan. Outside of those early Thunder Dragon builds though, this card has been pretty unsuccessful. It's not necessarily that this card is hard to summon. It's sort of the same line of thinking as Dark-Armed Dragon. There are just other better options for going second. Now, Blackluster Soldier does have the unique advantage of banishing cards in the graveyard, which was really good in Thunder Dragons. The main problem though is that Chaos Dragon Levianeer was released, which is not only good going second like BLS, but also good going first, having 2 really, really powerful going first effects, either a Monster Reborn effect for banishing all light monsters, or a take a card out of your opponent's hand effect for banishing all darks. Dark-Armed Dragon and Chaos Dragon Levianeer are different enough to not really be competing for deck space. Chaos Dragon Levianeer is more played in Chaos decks, where Dark-Armed Dragon is more just played in dark decks. However, Blackluster Soldier absolutely is competing directly with Chaos Dragon Levineer for main deck spots, and when you make that comparison, you'll see that Chaos Dragon Levineer wins out like 90% of the time. Two things happened when Book of Moon went to 3 copies per deck in January of 2020 after being limited for a very, very long time. First, you had all the champion pack versions of this card, the super rares, like double or triple in price. Currently they're sitting at several $100s per copy. And second, Rank 10 Yu-Gi-Oh! Made a pretty funny reaction video about the card going to 3 copies per deck. One of the things that didn't happen though was Book of Moon seeing competitive success. And that's kind of a surprise, because if you've been playing Yu-Gi-Oh! For a long time, you might remember that for like many ban lists, many years, Book of Moon would be limited, and then Konami would say, okay, no one's really playing it, we'll put it back to 3 copies, and now suddenly it's like a staple at 3. So then it would go back to limited, and then Konami would say, okay, now people aren't playing it again, we'll push it up to semi-limited or unlimited again, and then suddenly people start playing it all the time. So then they just left it limited, and that's where it's been for a while, until January of 2020. Now it's not really seeing any play. Now I want to make it very clear here that Book of Moon not seeing play doesn't have that much to do with Link monsters specifically, because while it is true that you cannot Book of Moon a Link monster face down, that doesn't really matter in the grand scheme of things, because Book of Moon was always really good for stopping plays before they happened. Your opponent summons a tuner and a non-tuner monster, well, you Book of Moon the tuner, now they can't synchro summon, or if they summon 2 level 4 monsters, you Book of Moon one of them, now they can't Xyz summon, so on and so forth. So that sort of stuff with Link monsters doesn't matter that much. The place where you'd probably consider playing Book of Moon the most would be a back row deck like Altergeist or Guru Control. The main issue there though is that they have other real trap cards like the Solemns or whatever archetype trap cards that they have that they'd probably rather play than something like Book of Moon. Soul Drain became unlimited in January of 2020, and since then it really hasn't seen a lot of play. This might seem a little bit surprising, and it is, because there's so many graveyard effects and even a couple really good banished effects too, and yet this card, which is currently at 3 copies per deck, is not really making an impact. What's the problem here? Well, the problem here is that Floodgates right now are in a really, really weird spot. We have so many ways to remove them. You have the Lightning Storm, the Evenly Match, the Cosmic Cycle, and the Nightmare Phoenix. It's really hard to actually play just a regular Floodgate and not have it just get popped immediately. And if you are going to play a regular Floodgate, why not just play Mystic Mine? You know, why bother just negating all of the graveyard effects and all the banished effects when you could just negate all effects in general, all monster effects that your opponent might have, and also they can't attack you. Mystic Mine sort of power craps Soul Drain in more ways than one. You know, it's a better going second card than most Floodgates, but also it's just really, really powerful and really difficult for your opponent to remove, especially when you have no monsters on the field. Soul Drain isn't a bad card per se, which I feel like I've said many times in this video, because like I said, if all of these cards made it to the ban list at some point in some past format, clearly they were powerful at one point in time. With Soul Drain though, I don't believe as long as Mystic Mine is unlimited that we will see Soul Drain played in that many competitive Yu-Gi-Oh! Decks. In March of 2017, Brain Control, alongside many other previously banned cards, got an errata out of Duelist Saga and became limited after being banned for quite a while. Then, a year later, in February of 2018, the card went to unlimited. This is one of those cards that, while you might not forget that it's unlimited, you might forget that it's errata. Basically, I get the same couple of questions like every month or so in a live stream when I'm talking about Mind Control. Either someone will say, well, when can Brain Control come off the ban list? And they might not realize that it's actually been off the ban list for quite a while. Or they say, why is Mind Control at 1 copy and you can't attack with the monster, while Brain Control is at 3 copies and no one's playing it? The Brain Control errata makes it basically unusable because you can only target a monster that can be normal summoned or set. It means it can't be used on extra deck monsters at all, because all extra deck monsters have to be special summoned to actually hit the field. Brain Control not being able to be used against extra deck monsters is really, really rough, which is probably why it's at 3 copies per deck and literally no one is playing it. Wavering Eyes was banned for a couple formats and was one of the most degenerate and awful cards in any Pendulum Mirror match. Having to constantly play around a Wavering Eyes for 4 pendulum scales was just an absolute nightmare, so Konami banned it for a little bit. What's funny though is that a couple months later, after this card was unlimited, because this was unlimited in September of 2017, we got a Pendulum format where Pendulum was like the best deck by a long shot, and even after pendulums got hit, they were still a top strategy. The main issue is that Wavering Eyes is really good at breaking scales and gaining a lot of advantage, but that doesn't really matter if your opponent has a huge board with 4 or 5 or 6 negates, or if you got FTK'd, which was something that was actually happening during that format. So while Wavering Eyes was really good in theory in the Pendulum Mirror match, as the focus sort of went off of the scales and was more on the ending board and that big combo that they were doing, you wanted to play cards like Raw Sphere Mode or Evenly Match to try to break their board. The scales themselves actually became less valuable in Master Rule 4 because you no longer could just pendulum summon 5 monsters from your extra deck for free. You actually had to have some Link Arrows first, which meant that Wavering Eyes, a card that is specifically designed to break scales, wasn't going to be as valuable in Master Rule 4. And finally, the Qliphort archetype, one of the most hated pendulum decks of all time, super annoying to play against with all their floodgates and all their pendulum monsters coming back over and over again. But all of those cards are completely unlimited. I'm not sure everyone knows this. So in February of 2018, we got Sacrifice to 3 copies per deck, and then in September 2018, we got Towers back to 3 copies per deck, and then in July of 2019, we got Scout back to 3 copies per deck. So right now, there are no Qliphort cards or Qliphort archetype cards on the entire ban list, nowhere in the limited section or semi-limited or ban or anything along those lines. And I'm not sure everyone knows that because people might be thinking, well, why isn't it being played? I mean, we certainly have more support for the deck. They got their own Link monster and all of that stuff. The main problem here is that this deck took one of the biggest hits from the pendulum zones moving into the back row zones, because the idea of a Qliphort strategy is that you'd have your scales and you'd have like 5 back row, but you can't do that anymore. And it's even worse actually, because if you want to have 2 scales up and you also want to have your Sacrifice up, well, now you only have spots for 2 back row, which is really rough. Qliphorts probably will never be played again unless they get some crazy support, which honestly is fine by me because this is one of my least favorite decks in all of Yu-Gi-Oh! Anyway though, hopefully you guys enjoyed today's discussion video on Yu-Gi-Oh! Cards that you forgot were unlimited. A lot of these were taken right from you guys. Thank you so much for submitting your own responses on Twitter when I asked this question, like which cards did you guys forget were at 3 copies per deck. I really appreciate all the responses that you guys give me on Twitter for these types of videos. It really helps out a lot. Anyway though, I'll see you guys later. Thank you so much for watching today's video. Goodbye.